48 nautical miles from Shanghai, a luxury cruise ship named Riviera did something most vacationers never expect. It suddenly changed course and sailed to Busan, South Korea instead. Imagine being on a sunny deck, ready for shore excursions, and then hearing an announcement. We're diverting. New destination. Busan. That's what happened to about 1,250 passengers. Confused, frustrated, and wondering why their holiday plans were upended. Here's the short version of why docking in Shanghai would have cost the company as much as $1.6 million extra because of a brand new Chinese port fee. That's not pocket change, it's the kind of bill that can erase the profit from an entire cruise season. To put it in everyday terms, it's like a pizza business suddenly learning that every time they deliver in one neighborhood, they must pay a special delivery tax equal to the price of 1,000 pizzas. Overnight, the route becomes unprofitable and they stop serving that area. This moment is our entry into a bigger story. It's not just about one ship or one upset group of tourists. It's a small human snapshot that reveals a hidden tug-of-war between two global powers, where the battlefield is ports and shipping lanes. The detour shows how a regulatory decision, a line item on a government order, can ripple out and change travel plans, reroute cargo, and shift millions of dollars across oceans. For the rest of this video, we'll unpack how that $1.6 million number came to be, why it matters for cruise lines and cargo firms alike, and how it ties into a much older trade tool called Section 301. But first, let that image stick: a luxury liner turning away from a glittering city because a port fee flipped the math on profit. That single move tells you everything you need to know about how modern economic conflicts can look. Quiet on the surface, but powerful enough to steer ships and shake supply chains. So, what exactly was this mysterious new fee that scared off the Riviera? On October 14, 2025, China rolled out a brand new port policy, one that immediately sent shockwaves through the shipping industry. The rule was simple on paper, but massive in impact. Any ship with strong ties to the United States would now have to pay a special port fee when docking at Chinese ports. The fee wasn't random. It was calculated by weight. Each vessel would be charged $56 per ton, and that rate would rise every year until it reached $157 per ton by 2028. So when you consider that a large cruise ship like the Riviera weighs around 30,000 tons, you can see where that huge $1.6 million figure came from. It's like charging someone for parking, but the car is the size of a skyscraper. Now, who exactly had to pay? China's new rule targeted 6 main categories. 1. Ships owned by American companies. 2. Ships operated by American companies. 3. Ships where U.S. entities own 25% or more of the company. 4. Ships flying the U.S. flag. 5. Ships built in the United States. And 6. Ships chaired or controlled by an American citizen. Basically, if a vessel had American fingerprints anywhere in its ownership, it got hit with this fee. But there were also clever exemptions. For example, ships built in China, or vessels entering a Chinese shipyard for repairs while empty, didn't have to pay. Even some cruise ships that served mostly Chinese passengers could apply for a waiver. It was China's way of saying, we're not targeting everyone, just those linked to a certain country. To visualize it, think of China's ports as exclusive clubs. If your ship was made in China or served the Chinese market, you got in for free. But if you sailed under American ownership, the bouncer suddenly demanded $1 million cover charge. This fee wasn't just about money, it was a message. It was a direct response to something the United States had done earlier, a trade policy known as the Section 301 investigation. And that's where the real story begins, because this port tax wasn't created in isolation. It was retaliation, a counterpunch in a long-running economic duel that started years earlier in Washington. To understand why China suddenly started charging American ships millions just to dock, we need to rewind to where this all began, with a U.S. law called Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, this law isn't new. It's like a powerful tool the United States keeps in its back pocket, one it can pull out whenever it believes another country is playing unfairly in trade. Section 301 allows the U.S. government to launch investigations, impose tariffs, or restrict imports against countries accused of unfair trade practices. It's basically Washington's version of saying, play fair, or we'll make it expensive not to. But here's the twist. Starting in 2017, under former President Donald Trump, this old law got a brand new life. Trump didn't just dust it off, he turned it into a weapon. In his eyes, tariffs were no longer just about trade, they were about power. With Section 301 as the legal backing, the U.S. began slapping extra tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. At first, it was a 10% tariff, but it didn't stop there. Soon it jumped to 25%, then more categories were added, covering everything from electronics to machinery. The result? Chinese exports became more expensive in American markets, and Chinese companies started feeling the squeeze. But the trade war didn't stay confined to goods. The U.S. expanded Section 301's reach into shipping and shipbuilding, accusing China of subsidizing its maritime industry unfairly. Chinese shipping companies suddenly found their vessels facing longer inspections, customs delays, and even bans on certain U.S. government contracts. Think about it like this. If global trade were a marathon, China was a top runner. But with Section 301, the U.S. started adding weights to China's ankles: tariffs, restrictions, and endless paperwork. By 2025, the situation had escalated again. New waves of tariffs, some as high as 125%, were introduced under the revived Section 301 investigation. Even ships built in China or linked to Chinese companies started facing higher entry fees at U.S. ports. China, of course, didn't take that quietly. For every move by the U.S., Beijing was preparing a countermove. So when China introduced its massive port fee in October 2025, it wasn't just random, it was a direct response to this years-long trade campaign. In essence, the Riviera's detour wasn't caused by a surprise new rule. It was caught in the middle of a geopolitical chess match, one that began nearly a decade earlier when both nations started weaponizing trade policies. On paper, policies like Section 301 and China's port fee look like a battle between governments. But in the real world, it's not politicians who pay the price. It's people and companies caught in the middle. Take the Riviera, for example. The company operating it didn't just lose one stop in Shanghai. It lost 5 scheduled stops a year. If each visit cost about $1.6 million, that's roughly $8 million in new fees annually. For most cruise lines, that's more than the total profit from that entire route. Imagine running a restaurant and learning that every time you open your doors in a certain city, you owe the government $1 million. You'd close shop immediately. That's exactly what these cruise companies did. They started avoiding China altogether. But the pain doesn't stop with luxury liners. Container ships, the backbone of global trade, face even higher stakes. Unlike cruises, cargo ships can't just skip a port without consequences. Their routes are planned months in advance, down to the hour, because every minute a ship waits costs money. A large container ship can burn through $10,000 in fuel every hour it's delayed. Add new port fees or reroutes, and the losses multiply quickly. And here's the real domino effect. When shipping companies pay more, exporters raise their prices, importers pass those costs to businesses, and eventually, consumers feel it at the checkout counter. A small rise in port fees in Shanghai could mean your phone, sneakers, or home appliance costs a few dollars more in stores halfway across the world. Then there are the passengers. Imagine paying thousands for a dream cruise to Shanghai, only to wake up and find out you're docking in South Korea instead. Many passengers on the Riviera felt cheated and confused. Their vacation became a headline in an international trade dispute they didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, smaller companies, freight forwarders, travel agencies, even local ports, all feel the shockwaves. A single port call cancellation doesn't just affect one company, it affects hundreds of workers, from port crews to tour guides to truck drivers waiting to move goods inland. Trade wars sound abstract when we hear about them on the news, but behind every tariff or fee, there are ripple effects touching ordinary lives. In a way, each ship rerouted or delayed is like a floating reminder that political decisions made in Washington and Beijing don't stay in the halls of power. They land on decks, docks, and dinner tables around the world. To really see how this policy plays out, let's look at 3 real cases, each showing a different side of the same story. First, the Manuka, a container ship operated by the US-based Mars Group. The ship had already docked at Ningbo Port in China on October 13th, just one day before the new regulation took effect. But when the policy officially kicked in, the port authorities handed the company an unexpected invoice, a $630,000 fee under the new rule. That bill was almost half the vessel's entire charter cost. In shipping terms, that's devastating. It's like paying half your car's total value just to park it overnight. The Manuka became the first official test case of the new system, and it sent shockwaves through the industry. Then there's the Riviera, the luxury cruise ship we met at the beginning of this story. Originally scheduled to dock in Shanghai, the ship changed course at the last minute to avoid paying an estimated $1.64 million in port charges. Passengers were frustrated and confused, but the company had no real choice. Stopping in China would have turned a profitable route into a financial disaster. In fact, the Riviera had planned 5 visits to Shanghai that year. Paying those fees every time would have cost over $8 million total, about 8 times the net profit from that single cruise line. For the company, the math was simple. It's cheaper to upset passengers than to risk bankruptcy, but not every ship was unlucky. Take the Spectrum of the Seas, a massive cruise liner owned by Royal Caribbean. On paper, it looks like it should have been charged too. The company is American, the management is American, and the ship sails international routes. But the Spectrum had one key difference. It's registered in the Bahamas, built in Germany, and serves mostly Chinese passengers. Under the fine print of China's new regulation, that combination gave it an exemption. In other words, while ships like the Riviera were punished for being too American, the Spectrum was spared because it had cleverly diversified its legal identity. It's kind of like a student changing their school ID and suddenly avoiding detention. China's rules didn't just test shipping companies' finances, they tested their paperwork. These 3 cases, the Manuka, the Riviera, and the Spectrum of the Seas, tell the whole story in miniature. One ship paid dearly, one fled, and one escaped through a legal loophole. Together they show that in global trade, success often depends not only on size or wealth, but on how well you can navigate the rules. Now that we've seen how individual ships were hit, let's zoom out to the global scale. Because these port fees and investigations didn't just affect a few companies. They've begun to reshape entire trade routes and economies. Before all this started, Chinese vessels were a huge presence in US ports. In 2024, about 14,300 Chinese ships arrived at American docks, making up nearly 1/5 of all port calls in the United States. But after the US revived the Section 301 investigation and China hit back with its port fees, those numbers collapsed. At the Port of Oakland, the number of Chinese-built ships dropped by 83%. At the Port of Los Angeles, by 71%. That's not just a statistic. That's a massive slowdown in one of the world's busiest supply chains. When fewer ships come in, port workers get fewer shifts, logistics firms lose contracts, and local economies lose revenue. Experts estimate that within the first year of these policies, U.S. ports alone lost around $3 billion in direct and indirect income. That's the price of several brand new terminals. Gone. Not because of natural disasters or strikes, but because of tariffs and political retaliation. But the losses didn't stop at America's shores. As ships avoided China or changed their routes, entire trade networks had to adjust. Many companies began sending their cargo to Japan, South Korea, or Singapore first, before redirecting it to China by land or smaller vessels. That might sound clever, but it's slower, more expensive, and burns more fuel. Every detour adds cost, and those costs eventually roll downhill to everyday consumers. And while American ports were losing business, South Korea and Japan were seeing a quiet boom. Their ports suddenly became the middlemen of East Asian shipping. Busan, for example, saw an increase in cruise and cargo arrivals almost overnight, not because of new tourism campaigns, but because of the geopolitical tug-of-war next door. Meanwhile, U.S. exporters, especially smaller manufacturers, felt another kind of pain. With China's retaliatory fees in place, their products became harder and more expensive to move. Some had to cut back shipments, while others paused their China operations entirely. Over time, those decisions lead to fewer exports, fewer factory orders, and lost jobs back home. What's ironic is that both countries, in trying to protect themselves, ended up hurting their own economies. The U.S. lost trade volume, China risked losing foreign shipping traffic, and global consumers started paying higher prices for the same goods. It's a reminder that in a world this interconnected, no one really wins a trade war. The ocean may look calm, but beneath it, the economic waves are hitting every shore. When two superpowers clash through trade, companies don't just sit and wait, they adapt, improvise, and sometimes outsmart both sides. The new Chinese port fees and U.S. Section 301 restrictions pushed global shipping firms into what some call the era of corporate chess. Every move is calculated. Every change of ownership or registration is a strategic play to survive. Take the case of Eco-Tankers, a U.S.-listed shipping company. Just days before China's port fees took effect, two of its board members, both American, suddenly resigned. Officially, the company called it a routine personnel adjustment. But the timing was no coincidence. Their departure meant the company could now argue it no longer had American leadership, and therefore didn't qualify as a U.S.-controlled firm under China's rules. In other words, it found a loophole to dodge millions in future fees. This kind of paper maneuvering has become increasingly common. Shipping companies are reflagging their vessels, registering them under countries like Panama, Liberia, or the Bahamas, where regulations are friendlier. These so-called flags of convenience act like new passports for ships. A vessel might still be owned by an American company, but if it sails under a Bahamian flag, it can sometimes sidestep certain penalties. It's a legal gray zone, but in global trade, gray zones are where survival happens. Other firms are changing their logistics strategies entirely. Some U.S.-linked ships now unload cargo in South Korea or Vietnam, then send goods to China by land or smaller regional ships that aren't affected by the fees. This hub-and-spoke workaround costs more time and fuel, but it's still cheaper than paying $1 million docking bill. And on the Chinese side, companies are adjusting too. Many shipping giants have started avoiding U.S. ports altogether, focusing instead on strengthening routes within Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. By reducing exposure to U.S. sanctions, they protect their profits and expand influence in developing markets. What's happening here isn't just business, it's strategy at a global scale. Every boardroom meeting, every registry change, every rerouted vessel is part of a quiet tug-of-war where corporations try to stay one step ahead of politics. But this constant adaptation comes with a cost: uncertainty. Businesses can't plan long-term if rules keep changing. And in an industry where ships take years to build and billions to operate, that kind of uncertainty is dangerous. It slows investment, raises prices, and makes the entire shipping system, the backbone of global trade, less stable. So while these corporate maneuvers might look clever, they're really just short-term survival tactics in a much bigger struggle. The more both sides escalate, the harder it becomes for companies to operate without breaking someone's rule. At first glance, all of this seems to be about logistics, ports, tariffs, and cargo routes. But underneath, this entire conflict is really about control. Who gets to set the rules of global trade in the 21st century? For decades, the United States has been the world's trade referee. American laws like Section 301 have long been used to punish countries that the U.S. believes engage in unfair trade practices. It's a powerful tool that gives Washington leverage without firing a single shot. But as China's economy grew, and as it became the largest trading partner for over 120 countries, that balance began to shift. China no longer wants to play by Western written rules. Instead, it's writing its own. The new port fee isn't just about collecting money, it's a symbolic declaration. If you can investigate us, we can investigate you. It's China's way of saying, the game is no longer one-sided. Think of it like this. For decades, the US was the teacher handing out grades. Now China is saying, we'll grade you too. And that's what makes this so significant. It's not an economic spat, it's a redefinition of power. Every ship that diverts its route, every company that reflags its vessel, and every policy that ripples across the Pacific is part of a new reality where no single country controls global trade anymore. The old world, where the US dominated international commerce and China simply supplied cheap labor, is fading. In its place is a tense, unpredictable system where both giants are constantly testing each other's limits. And it's not just them. Countries like India, Vietnam, and Indonesia are quietly watching and learning. They see opportunity in the chaos, a chance to attract investment and grow while the two biggest players clash. As shipping lanes shift and alliances realign, these emerging economies could become the biggest winners of all. So yes, the story began with a cruise ship avoiding a port bill. But the truth runs far deeper. It's about two nations wrestling for control over the flow of goods, rules, and influence. A silent struggle that touches every container, every ship, and every consumer on Earth. This is not just a trade war. It's an economic Cold War, fought not with weapons, but with policies, tariffs, and regulations. And unlike past wars, this one doesn't make headlines every day, because it's happening quietly, through laws, fees, and rerouted ships. When the dust settles, one truth becomes painfully clear. There are no real winners in this economic showdown. Both China and the United States are powerful, but in this trade confrontation, every move they make ends up hurting someone, somewhere, on both sides of the Pacific. For the U.S., the Section 301 investigation might have been designed to pressure China, but it has backfired in unexpected ways. American ports have become quieter. According to estimates, U.S. port activity dropped sharply, with the Port of Oakland seeing an 83% fall in Chinese-built container ships, and Los Angeles dropping over 70%. That means fewer ships, fewer goods, and fewer workers needed on the docks. It's not just numbers on paper, it's real people. Port operators, truck drivers, warehouse staff, losing shifts, income, and stability. Meanwhile, China's retaliatory port fees also come with their own costs. Foreign tourism takes a hit, with cruise lines rerouting away from Chinese cities, leaving behind empty terminals and missed business opportunities for local shops and workers. Even though Beijing's policy is strategic, it also sends a message that can make foreign investors uneasy. And in today's globalized economy, that hesitation can spread fast. It's like watching two heavyweight boxers trading blows. Every punch leaves both bruised, even if one appears to be winning in the moment. The $1.6 million port fee that forced a cruise ship to divert might seem like a small detail, but multiply that effect across hundreds of vessels, and you start to see how fragile and expensive this power struggle really is. And at the very bottom of this chain are ordinary citizens. Consumers who notice rising prices, delayed goods, or fewer job opportunities. Whether it's a phone assembled in Shenzhen or a car shipped from California, trade friction eventually trickles down to us. In the end, this isn't a story about policies or paperwork. It's a reminder of how deeply connected our world has become. One decision in Washington or Beijing can ripple through ports, companies, and homes across continents. China's message is clear: we won't be pushed around. America's message is just as firm: we won't back down. But as both stand their ground, the global economy trembles in between. That's why this moment matters. It's not only about who gains an advantage today, it's about shaping the future order of global trade. And as this silent economic war continues, one thing is certain: the world will never trade the same way again. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we'll keep uncovering the global shifts shaping tomorrow's world. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.